I would ask how your weekend was, but I kind of know because I went and saw Junk on Saturday, and it was really great. This is your first Broadway show.
It is my first Broadway show.
And you guys just opened on November 2nd, so how's it going so far?
It's been incredible. It's been incredible. It's one thing to be a part of a play that is so brilliantly written. It's another thing to be a part of a piece that is relevant to where we are right now. It's not political, it's not a polemic, it's not a referendum on any one person. It is just about the nature of how money has so insidiously buried itself into the fabric of the way we live, the way we think. And the play doesn't solve anything, as we were talking about earlier. It doesn't solve anything, it literally just reveals it all, the underbelly of finance and how everything has been financialized without us knowing it. And so that's what I've loved, being a part of that, and also hearing the audience react to those moments where they're like, wait, I'm a part of this. I live in this world too.
This affects me.
This affects me. Yeah. And it's actually unsettling in some ways to realize that. As I was reading it, like months ago, when I first picked up this script, the first time I read it, I said the F word out loud. As soon as I finished reading it, I threw it on the ground because it's so frustrating to realize that you have been hoodwinked too. Me, in doing this play, I have been hoodwinked by the financial sector in America. We all have. Surprise.
So let's stop there and kind of explain, because when you say a play about the financial industry, people are like, yeah, cool. Like,
sounds boring.
I don't really care. But there's sex, there's intrigue, there's drama.
There's desire.
So can you sort of take people through the plot of Junk and kind of what we're dealing with here?
Absolutely, and I won't ruin it for you, but the idea behind Junk and what Ayad has written is a play about how finance has wormed its way into your everyday life, how it actually works from the perspective of the people who make that money. And it doesn't say anything, it doesn't call them good guys, it doesn't call them bad guys, but what it does do is it shows them the morals behind why they do that, why they make this money, why they make these choices. And so it's a play about power, it's a play about desire, it's a play about failure and about triumph and the human and the monetized cost of those things.
And about risk, because Junk refers to junk bonds, which are these low credit rating, sort of very risky investments that this man realizes can be very profitable.
Absolutely.
And he more or less games the system and is able to make just hundreds of millions of dollars in a short amount of time, which throws everybody kind of off their kilter. And this is based on a real guy, essentially. Like, this happened in the 80s.
It is. It did happen in the 80s. And so to break it down, as Brittany just said, like, it's debt. Junk is debt. It's literally you as the investor act as a bank for somebody's idea, whatever it is. The government does this, right? You have treasury bonds, right? The government says, hey, lend me some money and I will pay you back. And we usually say, like, I could trust that bet. I can trust that. And that's why treasury bonds are they're considered the most secure kind of asset, right? But the fact is that, as you said, you can also lend money to people with risky ideas. And sometimes you can get a lot of money from it. And so in the 80s, it represented a perfect time in our collective history where all of a sudden you had deregulation, where all of a sudden banks can now do this, investment firms can now do this. It was the wild, wild west.
Crazy.
And so anybody can be an investor. Anybody could take your money and say, I'll give you some back. And it was on you if you were willing to take that risk.
And some people made a lot of money.
A lot of money.
And so you play a character named Jackie.
I do.
And, at first glance, I was really rooting for Jackie. I was like,
she's
this young, black, Harvard-educated, like, you go. And then, she starts showing some issues with morals and, which is very realistic. People, when money's involved, get a little dicey. So how was it like diving into that character?
Well, it was interesting because in many ways, when you play any kind of character, you don't want to judge your character. You don't want to look at the moral choices they make and say, you know what, like, I wouldn't do that. Because you have to find some way to validate it. You have to find some way to justify it. And what was so interesting about just that process, in understanding Jackie's arc as a lawyer, as a black woman in the 80s who wants to get hers and the choices that she has to make, what was interesting about just finding that arc for me was that's what we do every day. Whether or not we like it, whether or not we want to be a part of this system, we are all culpable. We're all part of this world in which everything is decided by how much money you have. How much student loan debt you have it's determined by how much money you have. All of these things are determined by money. And so the fact is that the more you educate yourself about this, the more you say, what is a junk bond? What is a stock? It's easy to fall into that place where you're like, I want more of this thing called money.
Absolutely.
I want more, so I will get into the stock market. I will invest in that company. I will get that ETF. All of these things that lead to being more entrenched in the system, where you want more money, where you want to accumulate more. And I think that's what I found so interesting about on the meta level of doing this play. The more you learn about finance, the more you learn about the way our world works, where it comes to the financial industry and the prevalence that industry has over every other sector of society, the harder it is to get away from it, the harder it is to be unplugged from it.
Totally.
And that's Jackie's story.
And so for you diving into this role, I would imagine you had to do some research. I mean, guys, this play moves so fast. The pacing is really, there's a ton of financial jargon. It's kind of confusing.
Yeah.
How much did you have to kind of dive in and educate yourself about this before you could actually speak it?
Absolutely. Well, Ayad, who's our playwright, he's an autodidact. So anything that he reads, he retains, right? So he was an incredible resource. But there's also so many people out there for the last 30 years who have been prophets where it comes to this, warning us as a country that you are moving towards a two-tiered system between the haves and the have-nots, the haves and the never will have. We are moving towards this. You have Robert Reich, who's actually coming out with a documentary on Netflix based on his amazing book called Saving Capitalism, for the many, not for the few, which is the idea of like all of the system that we live in is now class-based, right? And I think in some ways, the great obfuscation, the great deception is that it's politics, is that it's Republicans versus Democrats. It's none of that. It's who has the money. And I think in so many ways, what's been really interesting about the research that I did and the research that the whole cast did for the show is that we had to read about the ideology of finance in American society. And that's what was so interesting, that it is insidious. And Robert Reich, and going back to, Adam Smith, Wealth of Nations, 1776, where he even prophesied about a society in which you have the principal architects of society running that society. And back then it was merchants and noblemen. Now it's CEOs. And it's multi-million-dollar corporations. They're the ones that are serving their own interests, that are worming their way into politics, that are worming their way into the educational system, that are worming their way into religion.
Yeah. So for you, learning about this stuff, was it empowering or kind of depressing?
Man, I know. It can make you want to drink.
Yeah, because the more you know, I think the play does a really good job of explaining that the financial industry uses its own language. Yeah. So for the common man, you immediately kind of glaze over when people start talking about money because you don't speak the language, and that's by design. That's sort of like designed to keep people confused. And so the more you learn, I'm a reporter at Yahoo Finance, I'm constantly talking about personal finance issues, and the more I've learned, the more I've taken control of my finances and opened up stocks and stuff. But it is almost like it's very empowering, but then you sort of realize how much of a slippery slope it can be.
It is.
As well.
It's very hard, right? Because I think in some ways you want to learn about something that is wrong and you want to immediately be able to fix it. You want to immediately be able to say, I know the answer and I'm not going to be a part of it. But it's very, very difficult to do that.
Yeah, when you start making money, it's gambling.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we now live in a system, like I have student loan debt, right? I paid off my undergrad, but I have grad student loan debt. And the fact is that ties me to the system. If you are indebted in any way, whether it's credit cards, whether it's student loans, whether it's an auto loan, you are tied to the system, which means that you now have to go find a job that you may not enjoy and make as much money as you can so you can pay off that debt. And if it's debt that you don't think you can pay off until you're like 62, then that means you are tied to the system for the next 25 years of your life. And that's the system we live in, where very few people have the option to say, I am passionate about this thing, I'm going to pursue it because there are opportunities for me to make money doing it. So I think it's a hard place to be in, where you feel that you are almost weighted by the information that you're learning about the nature of the world at large.
I personally think conversations like this are so important, especially for people under the age of 35.
Oh, yeah.
Because I think we like to pretend like it doesn't really matter and it's like confusing. But I think the more conversations I've had with my friends about where we're at with debt, buying homes, how much we make, it actually makes it less aggressive, and you can have these honest conversations and people start actually taking action. But I think there's this like don't talk about your money philosophy.
It's a very
that
strange
contributes
thing.
to it.
I feel like we've inherited that actually from our parents, because I think there was that kind of, in some ways, I think our generation, that comes out of ignorance more than anything else. I feel like generations before us, it was more out of, I think, manners. You know, you don't talk about that around the dinner table or with people. I think our generation is more consumed with what we look like in a selfie, you know? And so it's not as important to talk about, like, maybe I shouldn't get that Starbucks coffee every day. Maybe I should save that for retirement. You know, nobody talks about that under the age of 35. And it is, unfortunately, it's a blind spot, because that's what they want us to be. They want us to be mindless consumers of junk. Quite honestly, it's been remarkable to be a part of this play. Like I said, I love doing what I do as an actor and telling stories, but there's a moment where there are moments that come to you where you realize you're a part of something that is so salient to where not only you are, but where we are. Like, that it resonates in a way that marks something, that marks a period that we have to reflect on, that we have to look to, that we have to take a moment and just take in. And I think it's quite a privilege to do this right now.
And we know that history repeats itself, right? So we saw the housing bubble burst, and we went through a Great Recession, and there's rumors every day of when are we going to go back into a recession. So it's sort of like, if we don't learn from any of this,
absolutely,
you know, it's going to repeat itself.
Absolutely.
Which takes me to an interesting, probably my favorite quote from the play, which is one of the kind of like very up in his career, very accomplished, very successful, very wealthy men. He says, "A man is what he has." And that really stuck with me, because I think we like to believe that we are our morals and our values and our everything else, but society more or less judges you on how much you have. So how did that quote strike you? Because for me, that was one of the biggest takeaways.
It's a sad reality. I think this character, his name is Tressler, and in the play, he represents a man who has everything, who seemingly has everything, everything that he could ever want, except the thing that he wants. You know, and I think there is this moment where he says that line, "A man is what he has," and I think it could extend to a woman or a man is what he or she has. And I think it's, as he puts it, it's an uncomfortable reality that we live in, that if you don't have anything in your hand to contribute to the collective good, whatever that collective good is, then you are worth nothing. And I think it's sad. It's a sad state of affairs, right? But I do think it says more about the environment that we live in than who we actually are as individuals. I want to believe that. I am such a determined optimist that I need to believe that.
I'm such a feminist that I maybe don't agree that a woman is what she has. Like, I like to think that women are a little more multifaceted, and we factor in a lot of different other things, and that even when you look at somebody like Hillary Clinton, she was judged on a lot of other things before on what she had.
It's very true.
So, I don't know.
It's very true.
I think maybe a difference by gender, but maybe it doesn't once you reach a certain level. You know, it's just sort of like you are kind of judged on that.
Right.
It's something to consider.
It is. I think it's interesting the people that we go to for quotes. You know, most of the people that we quote, most of the pundits, if you watch the news, the people that they quote, they have money. The Warren Buffetts, the Oprahs, you know, they have money. They have accumulated wealth, and unfortunately, in our society, wealth has become a national value. And the 80s, this play, it represented a moment in time where it was catalyzed. Deregulation coupled with the vile maxim that Adam Smith in Wealth of Nations that he says, which is all for myself and nothing for anybody else. This idea was catalyzed and enshrined into the way that we do democracy. And I think that is the uncomfortable truth, that it has now become enshrined into law that you are what you have. Yeah. You are what you've paid off. You are the debt that you don't have.
Is anybody else getting stressed out about their student loans right now? No, just me? Yeah, he raised his hand. So for people who are able to go see Junk, what are you hoping they get out of it? What are you hoping the takeaway is? What do you hope that they're talking about at dinner afterwards? What do you hope comes from this for people?
Like I said before, I think we don't solve anything in the play, and that's purposeful. Ayad is, the way that he writes, he leaves things with you for the audience to take away. Whatever you've taken away, hold on to. But you don't need to, you don't need to know who Alexis de Tocqueville or Warren Buffett's strategy to invest. You don't need to know any of that stuff to get something from this play, and that's what I love about this play. What I hope audiences will take away is a desire to learn more, a desire to want to know more, because I think our greatest enemy is ignorance, and more so blissful ignorance. The idea that, well, it doesn't impact me, doesn't touch me, that's how in some ways we ended up here. We ended up here with, because it's not political. We can say that, the guy who's in, the White House, it's his fault. It's not. And the reason is because this has been going on for decades, where you have a people who have been marginalized because of how much money they make or what they don't have access to. So you have the rise of the anti-establishment. It's for a reason on both sides of the political spectrum. So the fact is there's no one answer. There's no one person to blame. There should be no scarecrow. I hope nobody comes away from this play thinking, I know who started this. I know whose fault it is. Everyone has a hand in this, whether knowingly or unknowingly. We all have a hand in this. And so my hope is that you walk away from this place saying, I just want to know more. Yeah. I just want to know what I have a hand in.
I wish there was like a Rosetta Stone. It's like, I want to learn the language. But I think that's what I walked away thinking is like, I really want to just do a little more reading. Yeah. Just so, because ignorance isn't bliss anymore.
It's not.
It's really.
It's costly.
Yeah, it's very costly. Yeah. And so this is your first, Broadway play. Mm-hmm. Has your family come down? What has that whole experience been like? Because this, I would imagine, is a dream.
It's been incredible. So full story, I was supposed to be a lawyer. I come from a family of nurses and civil engineers. I'm Nigerian, so if you don't know any West Africans, I'm sure you do. We're all civil engineers and nurses. You don't become an actor. That's not what you do. But my parents are wonderful, and I convinced them that instead of law school, grad school for acting is a great choice.
Same thing.
Right?
Yeah.
It's great. Great choice. And I'm really glad I did, because I think in some ways and I was in politics for a little bit. And politics is just storytelling. It depends on whose story you tell, whose story you don't tell. It's a version of storytelling, shifting narrative. And so I think it's been an incredible experience to see my parents come see this story and see me do this on a Broadway stage. It's cathartic. It's surreal in some ways.
And you're Canadian, right?
I am Canadian.
So your family lives in Canada or here? Or
I have family all over the place.
Down to come see you?
They did, yeah. So I have family in Canada, and my parents right now live in Philly, so they just 2 hours, so not too bad.
Like a little train ride.
Yeah.
And so, obviously you're doing theater, but I was watching Master of None. Was that you? In the New York, I Love New York episode, which I think is one of the best episodes of the season. It was a really dope episode. But you're in that, how fun was that?
It was incredible.
Are you really open to experiencing all forms of performance?
Absolutely. It's storytelling, right? So the way that I see this my work is to tell a story in this body. Like, what is a Nigerian, Canadian, American woman who, what does she look like telling a story? And that's what's exciting to me, being able to tell different stories, whether it's through the medium of theater on a stage or whether it's through the medium of TV. It all tells different versions of story, and I love that. I love trying to do that.
And I would say now more than ever, there are roles. There are meaty roles for women of color, especially with the emergence of like Netflix and Hulu. I mean, I have felt so empowered watching Insecure and Master of None and Atlanta. So I would imagine being an actor, that must just be really exciting to be doing work at this time.
So empowering. And I think it's, in some ways, it almost looks easy now. Right, yeah. And it's like you almost have to pay homage to the people who have been doing it for 20 years, who have been trying and who have been writing scripts that nobody would pick up, you know, that nobody would finance, that nobody would back. And I think it says a lot about the people who have gone ahead of me, you know, to make it easier for me, you know. And the Violas and all of them that have been doing the thing for so long without any traction. And so it's really amazing to see how much traction there is and how many, the audience there is for stories that involve people who look like us.
And it's amazing. We're going to go to questions soon, but I want to ask what's next for you? I mean, you've got Junk, and then are you working on anything else, or are you excited just about the opportunities?
I'm excited about the opportunities. There's a couple things, you know, percolating, but it's an interesting space to be in, because it's like when you're in something like this, when you're doing theater, it's 8 shows a week. Yeah. So people are always like, so when are you done with this? And you're like, can I just be in this moment, please? Can I just, thanks. But it's exciting nonetheless to be hounded, you know, for availability. So
I feel like you're having a good year, so I'm excited to see what's coming up for you, for sure. Do we have any questions?
Hi. You're very aware of what's going on today with consumerism, and you mentioned many times that, you know, people under 35, which are actually millennials, and we're the Generation Y, that perhaps they're somewhat blind to what's going on with the realness of finance and so forth. But I would actually argue that millennials are the most informed and conscious generation, and that really, really Google things of like, you know, where does the conscious commerce comes from and how to spend their money. But what do you think the root of the problem is, besides tackling kind of like the results and the effects of our way of thinking? How, in your perception, how do we tackle the root of the problem of finding out more?
That's a great question. I think to a certain degree, you are correct in the sense that we are the most informed generation, but I don't think we are the most active one. And I think that's the key. I think recently we've seen an upsurge in civic activism and people being involved, but the trend has not been that way. The trend has actually been downward in regards to local elections and millennials running for things, which is now we've seen a turn. But I think just because we have been the most informed, because we have, you know, I don't have my phone on me right now, but like because we are tethered to our phones and we have access to information, has not necessarily been a direct line to us acting on that information. And I think in some ways, what I do in my own personal life, what I feel convicted to do, you know, even more so now, is to do one thing. Like one thing. If I feel a certain way about a specific piece of legislation or something that's wrong, choose one thing to do and actually do it. Don't put it on a list, Ito. Don't put it on your calendar. Just do it today. And I think that's something that if everybody under the age of 35 just chose to do one thing that has to do with civic activism a week based on something that they feel passionate about, I mean, we would change things everywhere, but I don't think that we have the bandwidth, or we believe that we don't have the bandwidth. And so that would be my opinion.
We're living in a different society. I've written some stories on the fact that millennials are doing a lot more freelance work. You know, so we're switching jobs every 2-3 years, unlike our parents who worked in a place for 30 years. And so our priorities are just a little different. Yeah. Millennials aren't trying to buy a house right now. They're trying to travel. But again, they're not investing for that long-term goal. So they're maybe not spending as much as maybe our previous generations, but we're not necessarily investing in our future, taking that action to really do that.
So. And I also think in some ways, because we don't have capital, we don't have skin in the game, we don't actually have power in and of ourselves, individually. So it really is only in the collective that we can move things, that things can change. So I think that is something that we have to realize, and that's something that is very hard for an individualistic generation, which I believe we are.
Really good question. I feel like we could talk about this for like another hour.
Yeah.
We'll take this offline.
I'll find you.
Who's next?
Hi.
Hi.
I'm curious because you said you used to be in politics, you were going to be a lawyer. Do you see that those things that you studied, do you see an influence in your work as an actor?
Absolutely. I had the great opportunity to intern for Obama when he was in the White House, and I think in some ways there is, when you're working for when you're working for the guy you voted for, there is a level of what is the word? There's a bubble that you're in. You know, it's the honeymoon, and everything is right with the world, and there is a blind spot. I copped to that. There is a blind spot that I had working in that White House, thinking that the sky literally was the limit. We could do anything. Consider that this was before we lost the House. You know, this is when the Democrats were running everything, right? And I happen to be a Democrat in a family of both Republicans and Democrats, and I was still in a bubble. And so I think in some ways there is a level out of that experience, and where we are right now, in terms of the political spectrum and the landscape of things, anti-establishment, establishment, I think there is a level of wisdom I now have where it comes to looking at stories and looking at opinions that allows for that speaks to that blind spot that I know I have, which is this thing that I get into, and I think maybe some of you can relate, where when it's your people who are winning, all is right with the world. There's nothing wrong. No, there's always somebody who's being marginalized. There is always somebody who's not getting their turn. And so just because I have my turn at the wheel doesn't mean that all is right with the world. And I think I try to apply that to my work, what I do. There's always a story that's not being told. And so whether it's in politics, whether it's in a legal case that you're building, whether it's in a story that you're trying to tell, there's always some other side that you're not able to see because you're winning right now.
That's such a good way to end things. Ito, it was so great chatting with you today. Make sure you guys check out Junk if you're in New York City. It's playing at the Vivian Beaumont Theater at Lincoln Center. Give it up for Ito.
Thank you, guys.